Ladies and gentlemen, my name's Paul, and in this RedGamingTech.com video, we're going to be discussing as well as analysing tech news which, as usual, has popped up in the past 24 or so hours. Hopefully you're having an amazing day. We have a ton of stuff to get through in today's video. It's primarily going to be focused on console, but I did want to start out real quick with some benchmarks for the RTX 3090. These are prosumer workloads, so I'll just go over them briefly. Credit to videocards.com for initially spotting them, and they are on the Blender website, as several benchmarks now for the RTX 3090 cards have actually emerged. Long story short, versus the 3080, you're looking at 15 to 20-ish% performance improvement. Obviously, the cards are a little more expensive, he says, putting it mildly, about $1,500 US, but they also come outfitted with 24 gigabytes of memory as well, which is obviously a profound amount. I suspect that these cards will be rather popular with people who do 3D modeling and those type of workloads. It's going to be interesting to see what the reviews say about gaming, because it seems that gaming workloads are not quite such a big jump. It's about 10 to 15% on average. But I would really stress that these cards are not designed around the idea of gaming. They are primarily created by Nvidia for the purpose of professional workloads, hence the ridiculous amount of VRAM that's thrown onto them. So either way, we can only wait to see how they actually end up performing. Also, a quick small thing for Nvidia's Hopper architecture. Hopper, for those who aren't familiar, is the next generation after Ampere, and it's still not 100% clear whether Hopper will come to gamers or whether that's going to be an entirely different architecture, but Compat Kimmy did tweet that there will be probably a CPU as like a secondary chip on the Hopper architecture, the H100s. And I was speaking to a couple of sources, and I believe that this is almost certainly true. And I think you can guess what that chip is. It is indeed ARM based. And it seems that details are kind of sketchy at the moment on how all of this works at a higher level. At least from the people I'm speaking to, but I'm sure you can imagine the implications for data center, for example, with having an ARM processor essentially on board with the GPU. It has a ton of implications for much smarter decisions on the GPU, much faster, lower latency, and of course, you know, you talk about, a unified architecture. That would be it would be very interesting. And it seems that it's not utilizing an x86 for host either. So it would seem to be that this system is basically ARM from the ground up. But I'm not sure whether it can also work in conjunction with an x86 architecture. So anyway, I just thought I'd throw that in there. But from there, let's move on to console stuff. A lot of stuff has been happening in the world of consoles, including something I did miss from a few days ago, and that is the size of games. As you are likely aware, the next generation consoles have, let's say expensive storage options, because the PlayStation 5, to upgrade it, you're going to need to buy specific NVMe SSDs, PCIe 4, and they are not cheap. 1 terabyte on Amazon or what have you, on average, is going to run you just over $200. As for Xbox, again, it's about $200. I will say that one of the benefits of the Xbox method is that it's super easy, and you can also hot swap them too. With the PlayStation, the benefit, of course, is that you are not tied into Microsoft being the sole provider, so it's basically swings and roundabouts. However, game installs will definitely be kind of big. There are benefits of the way SSD technology works. I've mentioned this previously in part 1 of my SSD analysis for the consoles and how it will change everything. Long story short, you don't need to consistently have duplicates of the same piece of data. I know I use this regularly, but if, for example, you're playing a Call of Duty game or what have you, and you're going through the campaign, and there are red fire hydrants through multiple stages and parts of a level, you won't have to keep duplicating those objects onto the disk because of seek and access times. This is very good, and it can change the way that levels perhaps are put together. In the end, though, it's going to be interesting to see how optimization works. I suspect optimization will get better as the generation improves. But getting back to the story itself, the game installs are pretty big. Demon Souls, according to official pages, is going to eat 66 gigabytes of memory. Spider-Man, is going to eat 50 gigabytes, which sounds kind of reasonable, but that is assuming you are just playing the Miles Morales version of the game. If you want to play Spider-Man Remastered as well, then the download's a bit bigger. That's 105 gigabytes, which is, well, obviously pretty damn big. And those are just a few examples of games which absolutely eat hard drive space alive. The full SSD of the PlayStation 5 is 825, the Xbox is 1 terabyte, but this is not including OS and how much that takes off. So unfortunately, those figures have not been released by either Microsoft or Sony at the moment. So that's a thing. I would probably say that this generation is going to be interesting to see how people's decisions are made for storage space, because it's like, I get it. I get that NAND is not cheap at the moment, and I do think prices will fall. But then again, asking someone to cough up like $200 on a drive, when they've just plonked down, let's say, 500 on an Xbox or whatever, it's an awful lot of cash. I suspect that there's going to be a lot of deleting and re-downloading, especially for people who don't have concerns over data caps. It will also be curious too, because I think that by the time that more games kind of get released that people want to buy, obviously, you know, the first wave of games probably are not going to fill up the drive initially. But, you know, in a couple of years' time, a year's time, there's a good chance that you will have all of those titles kind of wanting to be installed on your drive. So it's going to be interesting how that's handled. As a quick reminder, though, older games from the previous generation, you can use external drives on them. So, for example, if you want to play, I don't know, like an Xbox One title or a PlayStation 4 title, then you can use an external disc. But for PS5 games or Xbox Series games, you need to install onto the fast drives on your system. And I also feel it's worth noting that Sony are super sorry with the way that pre-orders have been handled. Sony actually apologised officially on Twitter. Let's be honest, the PS5 pre-orders could have gone a lot smoother. We truly apologise for that. Over the next few days, we will release more PS5 consoles for pre-order. Retailers will share more details. More PS5s will be available throughout the year. I have mixed feelings about this, because I do believe that Sony messed up the way that the pre-orders were kind of handled, because they did tell folks that we would give you plenty of notice when pre-orders would become available, and they didn't. I think they really screwed up there. With this said, it wasn't their fault that various retailers in the US and in the UK and basically, well, you know, around the world, completely ignored the date when pre-orders were supposed to have gone live. So I do think that ultimately a lot of this does fall on Sony. They should have given more warning, but I do also believe that the PS5, you know, the way it was handled too for the retailers, it was obvious that they were just trying to get in. Because obviously if you get your pre-orders up first, you're just going to get everyone and their mother trying to pre-order the console, and it's making things very interesting. I'm really hoping that shortages aren't going to be too prevalent for either Sony or Microsoft next generation. Obviously, we had initially reports that Sony's yields were not great, which was contrary to what many in the industry, including myself, had been hearing, that the yields were actually pretty good. Sony then went on record and said that they had not cut the number of PlayStation 5s which were being produced. And then, interestingly too, a day or two after that, there was a post on DigiTimes, and they stated that the PlayStation 5 production issues were very unlikely. That's according to their sources. For those unfamiliar with DigiTimes, typically their news is really good in terms of the semiconductor industry, and they believe that TSMC having yield rate issues with the 7nm process for AMD chips for the PlayStation 5 is, quote, highly questionable. But ultimately, of course, we'll never know 100%. It could even be, as that the rumour started because one batch of silicon had issues. But again, it's a lot of hearsay. Sony, of course, are going to deny it. But then again, I would be surprised if there were issues. Again, because I was hearing that the yields were pretty good. DigiTimes are reporting that the yields were pretty good. Plus, also, TSMC's 7nm process at this point is pretty decent. And that goes for all of their processors, including EUV as well. The final story for today, and it concerns the Xbox Series S. Eurogamer have a small interview with Andrew Gossen, and he was describing how backwards compatibility does work with the Series S. As you are likely aware at this point, the Series S cannot run certain games at 4K with backwards compatibility, and the console can technically support 4K. So if a game isn't super demanding, even Xbox Series games can run up 4K, but as always, it will be down to the developer, and most developers do seem to be targeting either 1080 or 1440p. But Andrew Gossen, in an interview with Eurogamer, which of course I will link in the description of the video, said that they designed the Series S to enhance Xbox One S games in the way that Xbox One X just cannot do. We've made it easy for existing Xbox One S games to be updated to run double the frame rate when played on the Series S. When games are updated, existing games can query to determine whether they're running on a new console, and in terms of performance, the Series S provides well over double the effective CPU and GPU performance over the Xbox One, making it pretty straightforward for the games to do this. In fact, the Xbox Series S's GPU runs the Xbox One S games better performance than the Xbox One X. Now notice they did technically point the CPU and GPU performance being double, but I think that they are basically throwing those two performances together, if that made any sense, and kind of putting it like that, because I can tell you the Xbox Series S's CPU is not double that of the Xbox One X's CPU. It stomps the Xbox One X's CPU. It is massively more powerful. Not only does it have a substantially higher clock frequency and supports SMT, but also in terms of IPC, the workload it can produce, it's just like not even on a par. It's massively higher. It's like way, way higher. The GPU, though, it's kind of difficult because people are pointing to the flops, but because the Xbox One X is running a largely Polaris-based GPU architecture, and this is running RDNA 2, the difference is pretty profound. We're looking at a substantial difference in architecture. They've had several generations, basically, at that point to improve the workload. And as we've said many times on the channel, it's not just the flops. There are a lot of other things that come into play. Geometry performance, for example. Texture performance. So much other stuff. So I really do believe that the Xbox One S's GPU is substantially improved over the Xbox One X's. In some workloads, it's going to be less of a big jump. In other workloads, it's going to be a tremendous jump. They also added, though, that there's no performance tuning necessary to get any of this working, as it's so often easier just changing 3 lines of code and the game works. Even when it's not that easy, fixes are pretty minor. We had one AAA title where doubling the frame rate really worked perfectly, except crowd animations were twice as fast, and so these sort of fixes typically are very, very easy for developers to fix. We're working with game developers and publishers to update their titles. It's basically be a select game that can run at double frame rates on the Xbox Series S. And they also added that they're going to be actively adding other enhancements. We've mentioned, of course, the fact that you will be able to run games with auto HDR, for example, which I think is fantastic. I think that's really good. I will say too that I think Microsoft's work for backwards compatibility has been stellar. I think it's really just fantastic. I do think that the value of the Xbox Series X to customers is really good. I do understand that it's not for everyone. You know, a lot of folks that watch this channel are just not interested. You want to pick up a Series X or PlayStation 5 high-end PC. I understand that. I'm with you. I get it. You want that high, you want that 4K, you want that high frame rates and everything else. I totally understand your perspective. But I do think that the performance of the console in the marketplace, I don't mean hardware here, will be really good. I mentioned this in a video yesterday. I think that Microsoft are going to have a pretty good winner here. Developing for it is a totally different question, but in terms of fans and people actually buying the console, I suspect it's going to be very popular, especially with the subscription service that Microsoft are offering for $25 a month. You basically, over 2 years, pay off the console, and you then furthermore get Games Pass as well. And if you look at the price of Games Pass, the console is basically, just costing you very little. And I know I keep saying this, but in today's climate, I think being able to give people access to a cheaper way to play next generation games is definitely always a positive. Normal stuff. Share, comment and subscribe, and I'll see you soon. Take care of yourselves. Bye for now.